1 week after giving birth, my mother looked me in the eye, pointed at my newborn, and said, "Pack your things. Your brother's family needs this house more than you do." I was exhausted, terrified, and too shocked to argue. My brother stood behind her with a smug smile while his wife was already measuring my living room for their furniture. They thought I had nowhere to go. They thought I had no choice. So I quietly picked up my baby, walked into the nursery, and opened a folder they'd never seen. Because there was one detail about this house my entire family had forgotten. My name is Emily Carter, and I'm 31 years old. 1 week before my mother ordered me and my newborn out of my own house, I honestly believed the hardest part of my life was recovering from childbirth. I couldn't have been more wrong. My daughter, Lily, was only 8 days old. Every hour revolved around feeding her, changing diapers, and trying to steal 20 minutes of sleep whenever she closed her tiny eyes. My husband, Ryan, was working on a 6-month engineering project in Colorado. We talked every night, but he couldn't simply leave the job. That contract was supposed to secure our future. So, until he came home, it was just me and Lily. Thankfully, we weren't struggling. We lived in a beautiful 2-story house just outside Chicago. It wasn't a mansion, but it was warm, peaceful, and filled with memories. The house had belonged to my grandfather, Walter. When his health declined, I spent nearly every evening with him. I'd cook dinner, organize his medications, drive him to doctor's appointments, and sometimes we'd sit on the back porch for hours while he told me stories about his life. He used to smile and say, "Kindness always shows you who people really are." At the time, I thought he meant strangers. I had no idea he was talking about family. After Grandpa passed away, I moved into the house. My mother didn't complain, and neither did my older brother, Daniel. They simply acted as though everything was temporary. Looking back, I should have questioned that. Growing up, Daniel had always been the favorite. If he forgot Mom's birthday, she'd laugh and call him forgetful. If I forgot, she'd say I was selfish. When Daniel quit 3 different jobs, she insisted he was finding himself. When I worked overtime to pay my college loans, she called me obsessed with work. Eventually, I stopped trying to compete for love that was never offered equally. My focus became my little family instead. Then, on Lily's 8th day home, my mother called. "I'll be there tonight," she said. "Bring Daniel and his family over too." Her voice was unusually cheerful. "We need to discuss something important." By 6 o'clock that evening, my mother's SUV pulled into the driveway. Right behind her came my brother Daniel's truck. I peeked through the front window, while gently rocking Lily in my arms. Something felt off. Daniel wasn't alone. His wife, Melissa, climbed out carrying a clipboard. Their 2 kids jumped from the back seat, racing across my front yard as if they already lived there. Mom walked in without knocking. "Emily," she said with an unusually bright smile. "You look exhausted." "I have an 8-day-old baby," I answered. "That's kind of expected." She barely acknowledged Lily before sitting at my dining table. Daniel and Melissa followed, exchanging confident glances that made my stomach tighten. No one asked if I needed help. No one asked how I was recovering. After a few moments of awkward silence, Mom folded her hands together. "We've been talking," she began. Whenever my mother said we, it usually meant she'd already made a decision for everyone else. "Daniel's family needs more space." I nodded politely. "They've been looking for a bigger house." "That's wonderful," I said. "I hope they find one soon." Daniel smirked. Melissa smiled like she was trying not to laugh. Mom leaned forward. "They already have." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "This house." For a second, I honestly thought she was joking. Then she continued. "You don't need all this room anymore. It's just you and the baby until Ryan comes home. Daniel has a wife and 2 growing children. They deserve it more." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. None came. "I deserve what?" I asked quietly. "The house," she replied. "You'll pack a few things, rent a nice apartment for a while, and everyone wins." My heart started pounding. "This isn't your decision." Daniel finally spoke. "It doesn't have to be complicated, Em. We'll even repaint the nursery for our youngest." Melissa pulled out her clipboard. I was thinking our bedroom should be the master suite. The girls can share your current room, and this space would make a perfect playroom. She pointed toward my living room. My living room. They weren't discussing possibilities. They were planning where to put their furniture. I looked around the table, hoping someone would realize how unbelievable this conversation was. Instead, my mother smiled as though she were doing me a favor. "You have 24 hours," she said calmly. "By tomorrow night, this house belongs to your brother." The front door had barely closed before my legs gave out. I sat on the nursery floor with Lily asleep against my shoulder, listening to the silence that followed my family's visit. Just 24 hours. That was all my own mother believed I deserved before becoming homeless with a newborn. Tears finally came, not because I was afraid, because somehow I was still surprised. Lily stretched in her sleep, her tiny fingers wrapping around mine. Looking at her, I made myself one promise. No one would ever make my daughter feel unwanted the way I had. As I rocked her gently, a memory surfaced. It was from a few weeks before Grandpa passed away. He had squeezed my hand and said, "When people show up asking for this house, don't make any decisions until you open my blue lockbox." At the time, I thought grief had made him worry about things that would never happen. Now his words echoed in my head. The lockbox was exactly where he'd always kept it, hidden on the top shelf of the hallway closet behind old photo albums. After laying Lily carefully in her crib, I climbed onto a chair and pulled it down. My hands trembled as I unlocked it. Inside were family photographs, Grandpa's military medals, several envelopes, and a thick folder marked simply, "For Emily." My heartbeat quickened. I opened it. The first document was the property deed. I read the names twice, then a third time. Owner: Emily Carter. Not shared ownership. Not a family trust. Not my mother's name. Mine. Legally transferred months before Grandpa passed away. Beneath the deed was a handwritten letter. His familiar handwriting nearly brought me to tears again. "If you're reading this, someone is probably trying to convince you this house belongs to them. It doesn't. I stayed silent for too many years while your mother favored Daniel. I won't let my silence follow me after I'm gone. This home is my gift to you and every child you may someday bring into this family." I pressed the letter against my chest. For the first time since my mother's visit, I could breathe again. The next morning, I called the estate attorney Grandpa had trusted for years. After reviewing the documents, he spoke with complete confidence. "Emily," he said, "don't hand over a single key." Then he paused. "Legally, this house is yours." The next morning, I expected my mother's anger. What I didn't expect was a moving truck. At exactly 9 o'clock, the deep rumble of a diesel engine echoed through the quiet neighborhood. I looked through the living room curtains and froze. A large rental truck was backing into my driveway. Behind it sat my mother's SUV and Daniel's pickup. "They're actually doing this," I whispered. Lily was asleep against my chest, completely unaware that her own family was about to turn her life upside down. I locked every door, checked every window, and picked up my phone. The security cameras Grandpa had installed years earlier showed every angle of the property. Within minutes, movers jumped out of the truck. They began unloading couches, mattresses, and boxes as if they had been hired to furnish the place. Mom stood in the driveway pointing toward the front door. "No, the sofa goes in the living room," she instructed confidently. "Daniel's bed belongs in the master bedroom." Melissa walked across my porch with her clipboard again. "I'll turn the nursery into Noah's room," she announced. "The baby won't remember it anyway." My hands tightened around Lily. I stayed silent. The movers reached my front door. It didn't open. One of them knocked politely. No answer. Then came another knock. Harder this time. Finally, my mother's voice rang through the house. "Emily, stop being childish and unlock the door." I walked to the hallway and pressed the button on the video intercom. My face appeared on the screen beside the front entrance. "I'm not opening the door," I said calmly. Daniel laughed. "You've made your point. Now quit wasting everyone's time." "This is my home," I replied. "No," Mom snapped. "It's your family's home." Neighbors had started stepping onto their porches. Curtains moved. People slowed their morning walks to watch. The louder my family became, the quieter I spoke. Melissa crossed her arms. "If you don't open this door, we're calling the police." I looked directly into the camera. "Go ahead." Daniel slammed his fist against the door. Mom demanded that the movers keep unloading. Lily woke up crying. I gently rocked her while staring at the security monitor. Then I picked up my phone. Not to call the police. To call the attorney Grandpa had trusted. Something told me this day was about to change everything. Less than 10 minutes later, the first police cruiser rolled onto my street. The neighborhood had become unusually quiet. People weren't pretending not to watch anymore. Several neighbors stood on their front lawns, curious about the moving truck, the scattered furniture, and the shouting that had carried across the block. 2 officers stepped out of the patrol car. Before they could say a word, my mother hurried toward them. "Officer," she said dramatically, "my daughter is refusing to leave the family home. She's locked us out and is causing a scene." Daniel quickly joined her. "We're just trying to move in. She's making everything difficult." The older officer glanced at the boxes covering the driveway before turning toward my front door. He knocked firmly. "Ma'am, would you mind speaking with us?" I unlocked the door and stepped outside with Lily resting peacefully in my arms. The younger officer immediately lowered his voice. "Congratulations on your little one," he said kindly. "Thank you," I replied with a tired smile. The older officer looked between me and my family. "They're claiming this property belongs to them. Can you tell me who owns the house?" "I can." I walked back inside for only a moment before returning with Grandpa's blue folder. "I believe these answer your question." The officer carefully opened the folder. His eyes moved slowly across the deed. Then he compared the documents with my driver's license. He read them again. Silence settled over the driveway. Finally, he closed the folder. "Miss Carter," he said, handing everything back to me, "according to these documents, you are the sole legal owner of this property." My mother's confident smile disappeared. Daniel blinked in disbelief. "That's impossible," he argued. "Grandpa would have never done that." Before the officer could respond, another vehicle pulled into the driveway. A silver sedan. Out stepped Mr. Harrison, Grandpa's estate attorney. He walked over carrying a leather briefcase and greeted me with a reassuring nod. I came as quickly as I could. He introduced himself to the officers and presented certified copies of the estate records. The transfer of ownership was completed months before Mr. Walter Carter passed away, he explained. The probate process has long been finalized. There is no dispute regarding legal ownership. The officers reviewed the paperwork together. Then the older officer turned toward my family. "I'm sorry," he said calmly, "but Miss Carter is the lawful owner of this residence." He glanced toward the moving truck. "I'm going to ask everyone who does not live here to remove their belongings from the property." For the first time that day, no one in my family had a single word to say. No one moved. The movers stood beside the truck, unsure whether to continue unloading or start putting everything back. My mother stared at the deed as though it had betrayed her personally. Daniel kept shaking his head. "There has to be some mistake," he muttered. "Grandpa promised this house would stay in the family." Mr. Harrison looked at him calmly. "It did stay in the family." He turned toward me. "Mr. Walter Carter chose Emily." Then he reached into his briefcase and removed another sealed envelope. "I was instructed to keep this until the ownership of the house was ever challenged." He carefully broke the seal. "It's a notarized letter your grandfather asked me to preserve." Everyone fell silent. Even the neighbors stopped whispering. Mr. Harrison began reading. "To my family, if you're hearing these words, then my greatest fear has come true." My mother's face slowly lost its color. "This house belongs to Emily because she earned it, not with money, but with love, patience, and kindness." I felt tears gathering before I even realized I was crying. She never visited because she expected anything in return. She came because she cared. Mr. Harrison paused briefly before continuing. "I have watched years of excuses made for Daniel while Emily was expected to carry every burden without complaint. That was never fair." My mother lowered her eyes. Daniel opened his mouth to argue, but stopped. If anyone tells Emily she should surrender this home out of guilt or obligation, know this. The attorney looked directly at my mother before reading the next line. They're asking her to sacrifice something I freely chose to give. The silence became almost unbearable. Melissa was the first to speak. You told me your grandfather wanted us to have this house. She turned toward Daniel. You said your mother already had it arranged. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. I thought she did. You thought? Melissa replied, disbelief filling her voice. My mother finally spoke, but her confidence was gone. I assumed your father would leave it to me. Mr. Harrison gently folded the letter. He didn't. He left detailed instructions because he believed Emily would one day need protection. No one argued anymore. There was nothing left to argue about. The movers quietly carried every box back onto the truck. One by one, the driveway emptied. As my family walked toward their vehicles, no one looked at me. I stood on the porch, gently rocking Lily, watching them leave without saying a single word. For the first time in my entire life, someone had chosen me first. And somehow, even though Grandpa was gone, it still felt like he was protecting us. The house felt different after that day. Not because anything had changed physically. The walls were the same. The furniture hadn't moved. Grandpa's favorite rocking chair still sat beside the living room window. But for the first time since moving in, the house truly felt like home. A week later, Ryan finally walked through the front door. The moment he saw me holding Lily, he wrapped both of us in the biggest hug I'd ever felt. I came home as fast as I could, he whispered. That evening, after Lily had fallen asleep, I told him everything. From Mom's demand that I leave, to Daniel arriving with a moving truck, to the police, the attorney, and Grandpa's letter. Ryan listened without interrupting. When I finished, he reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm proud of you, he said quietly. You protected our daughter without screaming, without fighting, and without becoming the person they expected you to be. Those words meant more than he probably realized. Over the next few weeks, we focused on moving forward instead of looking back. We installed new security cameras and changed every exterior lock. Not because we expected another confrontation, but because peace is easier to protect than to rebuild. My mother called several times. At first, I let every call go to voicemail. Eventually, she left a message. Her voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. I'm sorry, Emily, she said. I never thought things would end like this. For a long time, I stared at my phone. I accepted her apology in my heart. But forgiveness didn't erase what had happened. Some broken things can be repaired. Trust isn't always one of them. Daniel never apologized. Instead, he and Melissa rented a house across town and quietly started over. Life moved on. One Saturday afternoon, Ryan and I transformed Grandpa's old reading room into Lily's nursery. We kept his bookshelf exactly where he had left it. His favorite clock still ticked softly above the fireplace. Before placing the final picture on the wall, I unfolded Grandpa's letter one last time. I smiled through tears. He hadn't just left me a house. He had given my daughter something even more valuable. A safe place where she would always know she belonged. As I watched Lily sleeping peacefully in her crib, I finally understood the greatest gift Grandpa had left behind. That day, my mother tried to take my home. Instead, she lost the only daughter who had never stopped hoping we could be a family.